right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our IPAC Youth Conference, Reflections on the Pandemic. Our topic of our panel is experiences with COVID-19. And I'm one of your co-moderators. I'm Jenna Jazayerli.
I'm Sereen Hassaballa, one of your other co-monitors.
And we'll go ahead and introduce our participants.
Hi, I'm Mariya Bajwa.
I'm Senna Asbahi.
I'm Zayna Asbahi.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll begin with our first question, which was, did you guys experience any long-term extenuating symptoms or side effects after recovering from COVID-19?
I personally did not have any long-term side effects when I had COVID back in January of 2022, but my cousin, I know she had a lot of differences in taste for like a few months after she recovered.
I also did not have any side effects, but I've heard stories of an uncle and a cousin who both had serious medical issues because of their hard of breathing and short breath. So that's what I've heard of.
I personally never had COVID, but I remember when my mom got COVID, she had like a long-term cough and kind of just respiratory symptoms for maybe 2 weeks after.
Yeah, for my mom, actually, she lost her total sense of smell for almost 5 months after.
Yeah, along with my mom, she got it back in November 2020, and it's still not fully back. And we're almost 2 years later, she does not have her full sense of smell back.
But I think it's really interesting how these symptoms vary from person to person.
Yeah, they really do. The next question is, did you receive, all of you, a vaccine or booster prior to the illness? If so, do you feel it helped with the amount of symptoms you've received, the severity of your illness?
Yeah, so when I had COVID, I had already gotten 2 doses of the vaccine, and personally, for me, it was kind of a mild fever, my experience with COVID, and then I got my booster a couple months after.
Yeah, I personally, I've seen the difference in symptoms through other people. I got COVID before I received any vaccines or boosters, and I had severe symptoms. And from what I've heard, people who've gotten the booster or vaccine before they had COVID, the symptoms seem to be a lot less severe.
I have gotten all the vaccine and all the boosters, and I have been exposed to COVID a lot, and every single time I've tested negative. So maybe the vaccine has played a part in that.
Yeah. I think it does. It definitely has helped. I've seen with a lot of different cases when I got it. I was with a lot of family members the day before I tested and around a lot of different people, and thankfully no one tested positive because even though I was close to them, with all the vaccines everyone's had, they didn't catch it as easily.
Yeah. For me, I had gotten both doses of the initial vaccine, but I hadn't gotten the booster yet. And it was during the time when Omicron was really prominent. So I think that variant also contributed to my own symptoms being a bit more severe than other people that I had known that had already gotten the booster and maybe had a less aggressive variant.
Yeah.
Next, we want to know, was accurate testing widely accessible to you? And did your results vary between tests?
I feel like because of my family and a lot of our family's connections, we were able to access COVID vaccines, tests all throughout COVID. But I've noticed in many other families that don't have any medical professionals in them, there was not easy access to any tests. I remember a couple weeks before we were traveling internationally in 2021, me and a couple other families waited for hours and hours to get PCR tested in a tiny office in the middle of nowhere. So it was really hard to get those really good PCR tests, but the easy at home ones were a little more accessible.
Yeah, I feel that the more locally you get tested, the easier it is, especially if it's just like an exposure and not anything too big of a deal.
Yeah, I had the same experience as Senna. When I was diagnosed with COVID, it was an at-home test, and those were all very accessible. But all before trips, the PCR test, those required a lot of waiting, and it took a longer time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think now with COVID slowing down, obviously it's still pretty prominent. There is a lot of easy access to the at-home tests, but still, like all of you said, I think the PCR tests are just a little bit harder, to get access to. But it's definitely better than 2020 and 2021, which is a good thing.
For sure. I had it later in the pandemic. So obviously, like we were talking about, PCR tests were more accessible. But I had a unique experience where my test results were varying from test to test because I had taken a rapid test at a clinic that came back negative, and a PCR test that came back negative, but then all the at-home tests I was taking came back positive, and those were the most accurate. So I think it's just interesting that those results kind of varied, and that could be kind of worrisome for people. So hopefully that accuracy has improved with time and will.
Definitely. The next question is, did the experience and overall isolation notably impact your mental health?
So I didn't have as much of an experience as with isolation because my whole family got COVID at once, sort of. So we were still able to like be in contact with each other, but not being able to like see people outside of my house, like friends, I was definitely very lonely.
I
Yeah.
definitely feel that especially that 2020-2021 school year, my like mental health was like severely impacted just because the school year was so different, and I wasn't exposed socially to a lot of people, and I felt like I like lacked social skills.
Yeah, when I had COVID, I remember it was early in COVID, so I was really isolated in my room for 2 weeks because of the like unknownness around it and not wanting to take any risks exposing anyone because vaccines and boosters weren't available. And I remember being very like down because not only because of my symptoms, but also I think I had a lot to do with not being able to go outside because I had it in the winter and it was like bad lighting, just constantly feeling sick and alone took a major toll on my mental health that lasted even past when I had COVID.
Yeah. I've had COVID in my house 3 times. So twice in like end of 2020, early 2021. And I didn't get COVID in either of those time periods, but I still had to isolate from my family for 2 weeks. And like the rest of my family had COVID, but I didn't, so I wanted to stay away from them. But I got COVID recently, a couple months ago, and isolation was only 5 days. So I was only away from school for 5 days, and it wasn't as bad as how it was in 2020 for sure.
Yeah. And on the topic of school, I had it during winter break. So I was really grateful that I didn't have to miss any school because of that, because that could have definitely contributed to increased stress and impacted my mental health.
Definitely. I got mine right before finals, so that did
Yeah.
make it a bit harder.
Next, what did your day-to-day look like throughout the illness? Were you mostly bedridden, or were you able to like accomplish your normal work even while in isolation? Was it more stressful, or did you find time to relax while you were stuck in your room, you know?
So the first 2 days that I had it were probably the worst. I was in bed the whole day, couldn't really do anything. But then after the initial like bad part of it, I was still isolating, but I felt fine. So I was able to just get some work done, maybe catch up on like some hobbies that I don't normally have time to do. So it was kind of relaxing the end of it.
I had a different experience in some way than Mariya. I had severe like fatigue and I was sleepy throughout all like maybe 10 days. I think was one of the more lasting symptoms, and as well as like a cough and loss of taste and smell. So no food seemed appealing. And I was like very bedridden throughout the whole thing. And I think that actually may have elongated my symptoms because staying in my bed that has been filled with like COVID and sickness, I think that played a role in how long my sickness lasted.
Yeah, I definitely remember when my family was like tending to my mom when she had COVID. She was always stuck in bed because her respiratory symptoms like shortness of breath and coughing were just nonstop. And it was really bad for the first maybe 4 days or 3 days. And then I just eventually got better.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think for me, since it was only 5 days and my symptoms weren't too bad, but I did have shortness of breath for sure, and I could feel it. And once I was done, it was harder for me to exercise and stuff just for a little bit. But while I was in isolation, I tried to stay up to date with my homework and schoolwork, so I was able to do things, and it was still pretty relaxing because I mean you can't really leave your room, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, no, mine, I had a more like aggressive cough and just like overall feverish symptoms, but it wasn't like too debilitating.
Yeah. So the next question is, what for you felt like the main sign or implication that you had the virus? What prompted you to test?
So I had gotten back from vacation in Egypt, which they didn't have that many restrictions there. So I knew like I was definitely more at risk. And then when I came home feeling sick and having feverish symptoms, I took a test, and that's kind of how I knew like, oh, this is probably COVID.
For me, I was kind of around a lot of people that had COVID. And so once they found out, I was like at a super spreader event. And once they found out they had tested positive, I was hesitant to test just because of like the nerves and the anxious like feelings around that. But I developed symptoms and then I knew I had to test. But prior to that, everyone was still masking. So, and I was a little more careful around elderly and people who were definitely at risk. So I took precautions, but I definitely could have tested earlier when I heard that people I was at the event with had symptoms as well.
Yeah, I remember just like 2 days prior from when my mom tested, we learned that my aunt got COVID and a lot of our cousins got COVID. And it was a lot of like stress from the family being like, oh no, do we have it? Do we not have it? Because it was during a time where like we thought COVID was like going to go away, but then it spikes back up again. And my mom just started like coughing and coughing, and we were like just taking at home tests. And so it turned out positive.
Yeah. For me, I was around all my family, which could have been really bad, but like I said, it was a lot later and everyone had the vaccines. And I had a sore throat for a couple days and I thought it was nothing, but then I started to get really fatigued. Like I was super tired really like early into the night. And I did like wear my mask around my family because I did have a little bit of a feeling. And right when I got home, I tested and it was positive. So it was really just that sore throat for me in the beginning and stuffy nose.
Yeah, I was also at a large social gathering, and like 2 days later, I was experiencing intense like fever-like symptoms. So that just like prompted me to test. And it was also when Omicron cases were really high. So I felt like I knew even before I had tested that I'd have it. Um, and then we're at our last question, which is, for the sake of helping other people, what did you find to be most helpful in alleviating your symptoms? Do you have any like tips or anything that worked for you?
I took a lot of Tylenol, and I think just drinking water and getting rest, because you have to give your body time and you just have to wait it out.
Yeah, I think Mariya said it exactly. I think for me, the only thing that would give me of those symptoms was trying to get any sleep, even though it was difficult, and drinking a lot of water. But to be honest, the only thing that will really heal COVID, other than taking like precautions like getting your boosters and vaccines, is time. So just try to wait it out and be careful who you're around.
Yeah, your body will fight it at its own time and it will eventually go away. So you just take your time and don't exhaust yourself, and then you'll be okay.
Yeah, just like everyone said, there's really nothing you could do except a little bit of like symptomatic treatment. Like just like you said, if you need, take Tylenol for a headache or anything else, drinking water, just keeping up with your body and making sure everything is fine, your body, like Zayna said, will fight it on its own. And making sure your oxygen levels are, up to date and high, normal, that's a big part too, because that's when it's really serious and you need to get to the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it was just a lot of sleep, and I took a lot of vitamin C emergency to keep my immune system up.
Yep.
But that concludes our questions. Thank you guys so much for your time. We really appreciate having these sort of conversations. Do you want to add anything, Sereen?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think we had a good conversation. Everyone had a little bit of a different situation, and it was pretty similar as well. We all kind of had some similarities with our experiences, but yeah, it's good to reflect on it as it's starting to slow down.
Thank you, guys.